Hello and welcome back to the Full Stack Developer course where we are building a full stack bookshelf application. In this video, we're going to be integrating with the Google Books API and using Apollo GraphQL to do so. We're also going to be working on the Explore page, which is going to have a search bar with a debounce functionality. In here, we'll be able to search for different books, and this will show up a loading skeleton and then load up these books. We'll also be able to add these books to our bookshelf, which will add them into our database. As you can see, I've just added that one in right now. And we'll also look at some advanced functionalities such as pagination and updating Apollo categories when doing fetch more operations like this. This 5-part course will teach you how to create a full stack application in React using TypeScript, Material UI, and Apollo GraphQL on the front end, whilst using AWS on the back end with services such as AWS AppSync with DynamoDB and AWS Cognito for authentication. I'll be showing you the most easiest and scalable way to build your integrations. As well as this, we'll be integrating the Google Books API on our front end application so that we can see how to integrate REST APIs with the Apollo GraphQL library. This course will teach you many valuable skills that will give you great confidence on your full stack journey, so make sure to subscribe to catch all of the episodes as soon as I release them. There are some prerequisites to this video that I'm listing on the screen right now. If you haven't got any of these set up, go and check out the prerequisites video that I posted. I'll leave the link in the description down below. And once you've done that, come back and we'll carry on. So this is what our app currently looks like at the moment. We can navigate between these two tabs. We've got React Router DOM working. In the last video, we set up our backend GraphQL endpoint, and now we can create books and get books back. So to get started with the Google Books API, what we're going to do is we're going to head over to Google Cloud API Library. And in here, the first thing we want to do is create a project. Just going to click on Create New Project. And I'm going to give this a name of Bookshelf and click Create. So now it's creating that Bookshelf project for me. And once that's done, we can go ahead and select that project. It'll take us into this page here. Don't need to worry about any of these. We just want to go ahead and search for the Books API. And you can see here, Marketplace, it comes up Books API. So I'm going to click on that. And then I'm going to click Enable. This will enable the Books API for me. And this is completely free, so we won't have to pay anything for this API at all. Cool. So now we've got this API enabled. I need to create some credentials so that we can use. So let's go ahead and create some credentials. Here we'll just select public data so we can create an API key. Click on Next, and then it will give us an API key. So let's copy this API key and go into our .env file. And here we want to add in a new variable called Google API key, and we're going to store that in there. We're also going to need the Google Books API URL, so we'll add that in here too. Now that we've got these two things set up, we want to hook this into our existing Apollo GraphQL architecture. So in order to do this, we're going to create a new file called typedefs.graphql. And in here, we're just going to create some types for everything we're going to get back from that Google Books API. And the types are going to look like this. So we'll have a Google Book type, which will have an ID and a volume info. And the volume info will have title, authors, publisher, publish date, and so on. And you can see here, we've also got image links, which extends into here. And then we've got this type search books, which returns the total items, the kind, and a list of Google Books, which is what we've got up here. And then we just want to extend the type of query from what we already have to include search Google Books. And these are the different parameters that this query is going to take in. So now we can create a query for this. So I'm just going to call this search books.ts. And in here, we're going to be starting off very similarly as we did with the other queries. So we'll have a query named search Google Books query, and then we'll have a query of search Google Books, which will take in the query, the API key, and a start index. And then the query that we're going to be hitting is the search Google Books query, which is coming from what we named it in here. And you can see this is also taking in the different parameters. So this is when it starts to get a little bit different. We're going to be adding in the @REST directive to this query. And in here, we're going to say what the type is, which is search books, which is matching what we've called it in here. And then we will also want to add a path, which is going to be the query string that gets appended onto this REST query. So this is how we are constructing our request. So it's going to be using a query string of Q, and then it's going to get these properties from the args object. So you can see here, Q equals args.query, key equals args.api key, and so on. And then the rest of our query will be very familiar. as we're just going to be adding in the properties that we want to get back. However, we do need to add in the type directive on each of these objects as well, just to link them up to those new types that we created, such as Google Book volume info, and Google Book image links. So now let's save that and go into our index file and also export the new query that we've just created. And then what we can do is try and do a yarn code gen to generate a new query. I hadn't saved this file, so I'm just going to save here, and now that should have worked. So now if I go into generated and search for search books, we can see that this has come up. And let's look for our query. We can see we've got a use search books query in here that we can now use in the same manner that we're doing with all of our GraphQL endpoints with AWS AppSync. So if we go into our home component, let's create a new state variable called search, and let's import new state from React. And then let's use our query that we can import from our generated file. We'll talk more about fetch more later on, but at the moment what we've got is we've got these variables that we're going to be passing in. The query is going to be our search state. The API key is going to be coming from our end file, and we're just going to have our start index at 0. And as this will be running on the initial render, we can just console log out the data at the moment right now and see how that works. So if I open up the console, let's just refresh the page, look at the network tab. We can see that we are actually making the right call with the right query. However, it's going to the wrong URL. This is hitting our AppSync API URL, and we don't want it to hit that URL. We want it to hit the Google Books API URL. So the way we're going to do that is by going into our Make Apollo client file. And in here, we want to add in a new REST link, which will point to our Google Books API. And we want to import REST link from Apollo link REST. And then we also want to include this here by doing from, which will come from the Apollo client. And then we want to have REST link and link within this array. Let's go ahead and save that and then run yarn code gen again. We also just need to restart our server. I seem to be having some issues with my browser. I'm just going to restart my server again. Okay, cool. That seems to be working now. And if I go to here, we can see that now it's actually hitting the correct API and it's come back with a 200. Let's have a look at the preview. We can see the items have come back with a bunch of different books. If we open volume info, we can see there's effective JavaScript and so on. Let's just go to the console. We can see now that we do have those results coming back. We're successfully hitting the Google Books API. So now let's start building out our landing page and start making it look a little bit better. The first component we're going to make is a page title. So let's go to components and create a new folder called common. And in here, let's create a new file. Let's call it page title. And this is going to be a very simple component. We're just going to import typography from Material UI, taking a title, and we're just going to output that title in a H4. This is so that we can reuse this again in the future. So let's go back to our home page, and then let's change this into a fragment. And inside our fragment, let's have a page title. We're going to import from common, and we're just going to call this page the explore page. So that should look like this now. So we can have explore coming up. So we've got a title on our page. Next thing we're going to do is create another file called home.style.tsx, where we can create some styled components so that we can use those in our home component. And the one we're going to be starting off with is a search bar, which is just going to be a styled outline input from Material UI, but we'll give it a border of 1 pixel solid main color. We'll give it a small border radius as well as some padding. If we go ahead and save that, we can now add in a search bar here. We'll import this search bar from our home.style. It has an ID of search bar, a placeholder of search. The value is going to be search, and we want to also import a search icon, which I'm going to import from Material UI icons. It's also going to be full width. And now I just need to create a handle search function, which is going to look like this. I'm just going to handle search and set search like this. So now it should look like this, and I have a search bar, and I should be able to make multiple queries here. So if I change this to Harry Potter, you can see that now that's come back with some data. And if we go into here, we can check. Yes, we've got a Fantastic Beasts book. But as you saw, this wasn't very efficient, as every single character that I typed in made a request. So that's not good. So let's go ahead and fix that. And the way we'll do that is by installing a library called use Debounce. So if you go ahead and install that, we can then import this use Debounce hook from use Debounce. Then we can add in a new line here for the use Debounce on search to give us the Debounce value. And what this basically does is it waits 500 milliseconds before actually updating this value with whatever is in this value. So now instead of the query being search, we can change it to Debounce value, which will give us a bit of a nicer experience when we're searching for something. So I've been trying to use the new Arc browser because I like some of the new features it was offering, but it turns out it's giving me a lot of issues whilst I'm developing. So I'm just switching over to Brave. Hopefully this won't cause us the same issues we were finding over there. So just to prove this point a bit further, I'm just going to set this back to search, and I'm going to change it to the network tab so we can watch what's going on in here. And I'm going to type in Harry Potter. And as you can see, for every single character I'm typing in Harry, PP, is already made a request for each of those. So let's change that to using the Debounce value now. And now when I type something in, it'll wait for me to finish typing and give me 500 milliseconds after I finish typing to make that request. And as you can see, that's a lot nicer. We only get one request once the user's finished typing, and we'll still get back the results that we need, which is awesome. Cool. So let's carry on. The next thing I just want to add in here is a divider, just so that we can separate the search bar from the results. So here, let's create a box, which is going to have a display grid, and then we'll have the display template columns to have a minimum of 250 pixels and fill up as many as it can with a gap of 2. We'll just import box from Material UI, and then within here we can loop through our data. So if we do data.search Google Books items, as you can see, that's not very semantically pleasing. So what we're going to do is just create a new variable here called books, and we'll use a use memo, and we'll extract the books from the data using this use memo. And anytime it changes, and only when it changes, books will be updated. And we can also avoid having to deal with data coming back as null, as we can just coalesce it into a empty array. So instead of data, we're just going to do books here dot map, and then within here we can say Google book, which we can import from generated. And for now, let's just output something simple like the book title. We'll do volume info dot title. In here, it seems to be complaining about the different types. So what we're going to do here is actually change this up a little bit. We'll just change this to war, and then have as Google book array in here. And now this should stop complaining. So let's go ahead and save that. And as you can see, now it's listing out all the different books that is being returned by the API. So now what we want to do is within the common folder, we're going to create a book card component, which is going to be accompanied by a book card.style.csx as well. With this component, we're going to create 3 different style components. First one's going to be a card, which we'll call styled card. It's going to have a minimum width and a maximum width with a border radius, and then we're going to set the display flex with a flex direction of column. We will also have content, which will import from card content as content, just to have a height of 100%. And the card actions will be imported as actions, which we're just adding a justified content space between into. So let's save that. And our book card is going to look like this. So we're going to have the bookshelf card props, which will take in a book, which comes from the generated file. We're going to set an image height, as well as the card content and card actions, which are just going to be React nodes, so we can pass in anything for those. The reason we're building like this is so that when we end up building up the bookshelf page as well, we can reuse this component again later. So the book card will take in these properties, and in here we will use styled card and card content and card actions from our style file, and the entire card will be wrapped in the style card. We'll have a card media, which is a component of type image, and we'll set the image height to whatever has been passed in, otherwise it'll be 200. And then for the image, we'll look inside the image links to try and select the small thumbnail, and if that's not available, we'll select thumbnail, and if that's not available, we'll point it to a notebook image.png. So you can see that I haven't put a path here, and this is because this image is going to live inside the public folder. So I'm just going to put this image here, and if for any reason there is no image linked to this book, then it will just show that image instead. So the alt will be the book title, and we just have an SX on here to set the padding top to 2 and set the object fit to contain. Card content will contain card content, and card actions will contain card actions, and we're also going to disable spacing on that card actions as well. So let's go ahead and save that, and then we're just going to go over to home, and we're going to create a component in here called Google Book Card. And for this, we're going to start off with something a little bit basic. We're just going to have a props of Google Book, which will be what we're taking into here. And then we're going to import this book card from the other component that we just created. As you can see, we're taking in book, image height, card content, and card actions. So to get the Google Book type to be the book type that we created on our backend APIs, we need to do a little bit of mapping on our end so that they can match. The way we're going to do that is by deconstructing the ID and volume info from the Google Book, and then recreating that as one object for the book that we pass into the book card. So I'm just going to import that as well. And then for the card content here, we want to add in a stack and start building out what this card is going to look like. To be honest, the first thing I want to add is a title, but I think this can also be a common component. So I'm just going to create a new component called card title.tsx, and this is just going to be a styled component of typography with some styling to make it look a little bit better. So if we go back to here, we can add in our card title, which will have the value of book.title. And then we can also add in some other information here, like the authors, the publisher, and the published date. So authors is an array, so we're just going to grab the first one and display that. And if any of these don't have the values for any reason, we're just going to display a little dash. As for the card action, I'm just going to add in something in here for now, and we'll come back to it in a second. So let's try and actually use this Google Book card that we've created instead of just rendering the title here like this. So I'm going to import this Google Book card, and it's going to take in a Google Book, which is just going to be the book here. And we also just want a key, so I'll set this to book.id. Let's go ahead and save that. And now if we go to our app, we can see that we are rendering these cards with the books and the images. We could search for something else, and you can see these are now being rendered as you'd expect it to. So now let's go back in and deal with the card actions. So for the card action, I actually want to use a loading button from MIRI Lab, which we don't actually have yet. So I'm going to add in this package, yarn add MIRI Lab. Once that's installed, I should have access to loading button from MIRI Lab. I'm just going to call this add to bookshelf. And there's a few different props I want to add to this. I want to set it to full width. I want to have a start icon of bookmark add, which I can import from maybe icons. And I'm also going to have these two properties, loading indicator and loading. So whilst it's loading, it's going to say adding, and then if this is true, then this button will be disabled. So what we need to do here is actually give this button some functionality so that these two things can work. So in the last video, what we did was we used this create book mutation just as an example. But now we're actually going to be using it for real inside our Google Book card. So if I paste this in here, and I'm going to change this to add to bookshelf, but I'm not going to care about any of the results. All I really want is loading here. So I'm going to put loading, and I'm going to import this from the generated file, and then I can save that. Now I have my onClick function, which is coming from this, and the loading state will be also coming from this. However, in the other component, we actually used the create book function and pass in the variables into here. But there's another way for us to do this, and we could just pass in the variables straight away because we're not waiting on anything to change to receive those variables. So what we can do is within the options in here, we can add in the variables to create our book. So everything we're going to add in is going to come from this Google Book object that we have. And I'm just going to import book status here. Well, actually, it's complaining about ID because we don't actually need ID in here because ID will be auto-generated. So if we get rid of that, then these are all the different properties that we're going to be saving into our own database. So if we go back to the browser, we can see that our books have come up. Now we have these buttons underneath everything. So if we go ahead and select something here like this, it should say adding. You can see that was loading. And then now if we go to my bookshelf and just refresh this page, looks like it's potentially complaining about this. So I'm just going to change this into more thumbnail. Go ahead and save that. And let's just try again. We hit add to bookshelf. And now we can see that that has worked. So for some reason, it didn't like us just mixing and matching those types, even though they're basically exactly the same. But that's fine. We've just updated that now. So now if we go over to bookshelf, we can see that this book has also been added into our bookshelf. Let's find another book to add. Let's add JavaScript and jQuery. That gets added. Let's go to my bookshelf and refresh. JavaScript and jQuery has also been added. So we can see that this is persisting our data into the database as well. However, there is something else that's not quite right. As you can see, when things are loading, we are just seeing a blank screen. So if we refresh the page, we see that blank screen. So what we want to do is create some skeletons for the loading of these cards. I'm going to create a new file called Google Book List Skeleton, and in this file we're going to have this component, which is going to be a grid from Material UI. We're going to define a new array with 12 items and map over those. The item doesn't really matter, and within that grid we're going to have XS equals 12, SM equals 6, and so on, just so that we have something a little bit consistent. And then with those, we're basically just trying to recreate our card with some of these skeletons. So we have a paper with a border, we have a stack, and then we have a box with a height of 300 to mimic that image. And the skeleton is going to be rectangular with a fixed width and height. And then we'll just have some text skeletons below that with some additional fixed width and height, as well as a rounded one at the end to match that button. So if I save that now, I can go to the home component, and just in here what we'll do is we'll say if it's loading, we will show the Google Book List Skeleton component. Otherwise we'll show this component like that. Now if we save that and go back to the application and just refresh the page, we can see, okay, let me just add in a slow 3G so that we can actually see it in action. Let's refresh the page. Now we can see how these are loading. Another way to see this is to just set this to true so that you can work with it and edit it. As you can see, we've got a skeleton, it's pulsing. It looks like the card that is going to render once it's done. So that's pretty neat. So let's undo that. So now that's working quite nice, and we've integrated with Google Books API. So there is a bit of a more advanced topic I wanted to cover as well, which was how to do the pagination and load more. So there is quite a neat way of doing this with Apollo GraphQL. And this is why we added in this fetch more option as well. So unfortunately, the fetch more option doesn't actually affect the original loading state. So we need to manage our own loading state for that. So we're going to create a new state variable called fetching more, and we'll have it set to false to begin with. And what we basically want is a function to handle fetching more, which is going to set the fetching more to true and then await fetch more, which is this function, and passing those values again, whichever value we are. But this time, instead of the start index being 0, it's going to use the books.length as a start index. And then once that's done, we can do set fetching more to false. I'm going to create a button at the end here, another loading button, which is going to be handling the fetching more for me. As you can see, the loading state that it's using is fetching more, and it's going to be disabled if the books.length is the search Google Books total items. We've seen in the API that when we get the data back, we also get total items. So if we already loaded 1700 items, then the load more item would be disabled and we can't load anymore. I'm just going to save that. And if we scroll all the way down to the bottom and click on our load more button, we can see that it's loading and then it comes back with some further items. However, none of our items here have been updated, and although we've got additional data, we can't actually view it on our page. So what we actually need to do is we need to update the Apollo cache to actually recognize this data. So when we make queries using Apollo stores them in a cache locally. So if you install the Apollo GraphQL extension, you'll be able to see all the queries that your app has made. And if you go into cache, you can see all the different things that have been cached into this application. We've got a search Google Books query, and that's the original query that we did. And then we've also got a second one that's had the start index of 10. So this is our second set of data, but you can see they should actually just be one set of data, not two. There's actually something that we can do in order to make that merge happen. And that is by providing an update query into our fetch more option. So our update query will take in our previous result that was handled. The update query will allow us to use the previous result that we had and our current result. And basically in here, what we're doing is we're checking if there are no more new results, then we just return the previous result. Otherwise, we want to extract all the items out of the previous results and also all the items out of the new results. So I'm calling this previous books for the old ones and more books for the new ones. And if we do have new results, then I'm setting the new results to an array of the previous books and the new books. So I'm just concatenating the two arrays, and then I return that new array into this update query function so that instead of having two queries, I only want one query. And we can also move this set fetching more inside this function as well, so that just before it finishes doing that, it can set the loading to false. So if I save that now and go back to here, I'm just going to refresh the page and set no throttling, and let's go back down here. And we can see in here, we've got cache of search books. We've got 10 items. And if I go down here and click load more, you can see that now it's actually loading in all these extra books and I can view all of them. And my search Google Books cache remains as one query. And if I expand this, we can see now that this has 20 items and I can keep doing this and I can keep loading more. And it's just updating the cache for me automatically. And as you can see, this is going up. So that is it for this video. Please join me in the last episode where we'll be building out our bookshelf component, which will be integrating with all the different APIs that we've created on our backend, and to have the fully functioning bookshelf app. As always, if you enjoyed it, let me know in the comment section down below. Subscribe for more videos from myself, and I'll see you in the next one.